the next conversation, we're going to discuss the very important topic of why we need diversity to create a successful brand. And backstage, we have three ladies who can speak to this topic in great detail. We have Miriam Plon Sauer, AQKA's Executive Strategy Director, and the CEO and co-founder of Constellation Agency, Diana Lee. They will join us in conversation with the Shade Room's Judith Nwandu. Please welcome Judith, Miriam, and Diana.
All right. I'm so glad I got to get to know you powerful ladies in your industry a little bit backstage. Now I want everyone to get a chance to understand some of the challenges you both faced as women, and Diana as a woman of color, in your predominantly male industries.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about your career in automotive sales, and tell us a little bit also about Constellation Agency when you get the chance.
Sure. So I immigrated into the U.S. in 1974. I was 5 years old, and I had a family of four. And my parents were working pretty much 15-hour days in order to actually make sure that we can actually go to school in the U.S. And so coming from immigrant parents, it makes you feel most like you never want them to have the burden of anything. And so my entire life was always trying to make sure that we didn't actually have burden towards our parents. And so back in 1989, I started in the auto industry selling cars while I was going to college, and supported myself through that, and worked primarily an all-male dominated industry. So through that, in the last 15 years, I worked for automotive consulting, and then actually launched Constellation Agency 5 years ago. Within 5 years, we ended up becoming number 65 as the fastest growing company in the US, number 7 as the fastest growing marketing and advertising agency in the country, in the US as well, number 10 as the fastest woman-led company in the United States. And so it's been a tremendous type of exposure, experience in terms of where Constellation came from and where it is today.
Now tell us a little bit about the stats. I know you have some pretty awesome diversity statistics in Constellation Agency. Over half of the C-suite executives are women or women of color. So just give us a little bit about that and what kind of inspired you to make sure that the agency was represented diversity.
Yeah, and so over 60% of our leadership team are of diverse people. I believe that that is the foundation of why and how we grew so very quickly here. But I would also say that the interesting part was in my own company with our co-founder, we realized the first couple years that we were going to be challenged in this area. And I'll explain one of the stories that actually happened in our own company. So 2 years after we launched Constellation, I noticed something that was so very strange. And so I asked all the women in our organization to come into a conference room. There was about 15 of them. And there was about 15 males as well outside. And I asked them to look outside to where everybody was standing. And I said, how many of them actually asked for something? So these are all the women in our organization. In year 2, I asked, how many men out there asked me for something? Now, I'm a female founder, and if you didn't ask me, who would you actually ask? So how many of you in the room asked me for something? And they all looked around, And the answer was one. One person, one female, asked me for whether it was a raise, a promotion, a title change, more vacation time. One female out of 15 asked me for something. I said, how many of the men out there asked for anything? And the answer was over 60%. And so this was really startling at our own company, that over 60% of the men that worked for a female CEO asked for something, whereas one female in the room asked for something, right? The amount of people was significantly different. And that's when I realized that it was bigger than Constellation. The fact that we have to talk about diversity, the fact that we have to talk to our own people about advocating for themselves, because it doesn't come naturally. And that was something that happened right at Constellation.
Okay. Now, Miriam, you are a leader over at AQKA,
Yep.
and that works on design and communications. So that's a different type of creative industry than marketing and automotive sales. But how has your gender and other women, their gender, played a role in, rising up in a predominantly male industry as well?
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting difference between the visible challenges and the invisible challenges. I think the visible challenges, for me, the most visible challenge was when I was kicked out of the senior management team during my second maternity leave, which was quite visible, right? But I think the invisible challenges are the most dangerous ones, and they're the ones about not being listened to in a room, not being taken seriously, being taken for the PA, which still happens to me after turning 40. I'm like, how much longer do you think I can be the PA in the room? So I think the invisible challenges are the ones that hurt the most in the long run.
Okay. And something that doesn't get discussed enough when we talk about diversity, we talk about gender diversity and ethnic diversity. We don't talk about age diversity.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you're in, design and communications, that creative space. How has age played a major role in representation?
One of the strategists in my team actually have done a lot of research on ageism in the industry, which is a huge topic that is we're not talking about it enough. And what she found is that women after turning 40-something are not, listened to anymore. They're not seen as experts in their field anymore. It's a bit different from men. So I've just started, to be taken serious in a room because I've turned 40 and now I can just sort of hold myself with a different sort of attitude. But now I only have a couple of years before I'm not taken serious anymore. So I'm hoping that I can help change that, obviously. But I think it's a huge topic that is not discussed enough.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that you're kind of reaching that mark of almost, turning 40 and then suddenly people don't listen to you more. So they're looking for people who are considered young and innovative.
Yes.
And oh, wow. Okay. Well, the crazy thing is overall 40 is really young. So it's very interesting that that's a cutoff.
Yeah.
But so you, with Constellation Agency, there was a story where you talked about creativity in automotive sales and that representation from foreign talent, right?
Yes.
So talk to us about how in marketing in the US, in certain communities where there are a lot of immigrants, having foreign talent through Constellation Agency, making sure people who are outside of the US are represented in your company has benefited you directly with car sales.
Yeah, and so one of the clarifications is initially when we started 5 years ago, 70% of our clients all came from automotive. But we are a SaaS ad technology that makes thousands of iterations of ad designs. And so initially, when we started in auto, the automakers came in because I really understood the strategy of what they were looking for. And then very soon after that, we got every other vertical. So we work with pharma, retail, cosmetics, and all of the other brands as well. But what was interesting in this entire journey was that we had a very diverse team. And one of the things that we learned is that there's so many platforms that we all use, right? So obviously the two most famous platforms and the most powerful platforms obviously are Google and Facebook out there, and Facebook controls Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp. But then in addition to that, what we realized was that there's so many pockets of people that are on other platforms that speak different languages. For example, WeChat. So I don't actually know somebody who's from China or from Taiwan that actually does not have a WeChat app. And so they like to converse in that app. And so they're also in Korea, it would be Kakao. And so in order to have a very diverse team that launches for all different verticals as well, you have to actually have diverse teams that understand those platforms. And who better than the people that also came from those countries? And so it really helped us to stay nimble, innovative, and also innovate on those platforms as well. It was something that we didn't expect that would happen from the very beginning. But when we realized that we had pockets of diversity all across the US, and in Austin, Texas, I would say most people in Austin are Spanish. And so realizing that there's demographics of people, demographics of the variation of language, because obviously there's Dominican Spanish, Puerto Rican Spanish, Mexican Spanish, Spanish. There's many different dialects and variations that you also have to be aware about. By having employees from different backgrounds and different nationality gives you a competitive edge to understand the differences and the nuances of all the different languages and cultures that also exist in the U.S.
Yes, okay, so kind of elaborating on that a little bit, with Constellation Agency, you help provide H-1 visas to immigrants who want to work in the United States and some career opportunities as well. So in a nutshell, what would you say U.S. companies have to gain by really focusing on foreign talent in their companies?
Yeah, so in the U.S. currently, if you work there, you'll see that there's been sort of a uprising of a lot of people switching jobs recently, and people want higher wages. They want to feel like you care about them. And what I've noticed is that it's not the no-names that are coming after our employees, it's the Amazons, the Googles, the DoorDashes, the Pelotons. They've all come after my employees, right? And they're giving them better packages, better compensation, better titles. And it's happening all across the country, not just the Constellation Agency. But what is a clear-cut advantage if you basically have the power to support visa programs and offer green cards to many of the people that want to stay in this country, then you have a competitive advantage against all of the innovative companies out there. And I will say that that was one of the best things that we ever did for Constellation, was to have a sponsorship program that has sponsors for H-1Bs as well as green cards, because they know that at the end, you want them to personally be successful in the U.S. And that meant everything to our employees. It also meant everything to people that were not as diverse, realizing that would give those opportunities to people out there. And so it gave a really great reputation for Constellation Agency that we do support these programs.
Okay. Now, my next question is for both of you, but I'll start with you, Miriam. And just by the way, audience, if you have any questions, you can, pretty sure you have some instructions on the screen on how to submit them, and I'll take them as they come in. But diversity, a lot of times people talk about the difference between, at least in the US where I'm from, we talk about the difference between superficial diversity and actual diversity. So some environments have the numbers. They'll have a certain percentage of women and people of color and people of different ages represented, but the environment isn't one that allows them to feel safe enough or empowered enough to actually share their different perspectives, so it ends up not really feeling like diversity. How would you say, you guys combat superficial diversity in your companies or your industries in general?
So there was done, I think McKinsey did this interesting study recently where they asked a lot of people from different levels in companies, what would make them be better advocates for EDI in the companies? What would make them commit to EDI in the companies? And the answers were, for senior management, it was the business case. For the middle management, it was something that makes my life easier, my everyday easier, process, etc. And for the junior people, it was a moral case. And I find it so interesting that it's a business case for the senior management. And I think we've known the business case for so many years now. Companies with female executives in the board, they perform better on a lot of different levels. It's not what's making a difference. So I think we need to move the conversation away from a business case. And for leaders, it's about taking that responsibility and pushing for a culture of sharing and listening to people and listening to their perspectives, and actually leaders taking a step back and let the rest of the company speak. So I think, and if we do speak about a business case, then let's speak about human capital instead of pure ROI, because that's not going to take us anywhere.
Okay, and you are working from out of Denmark right now, but you oversee AQKA throughout Europe.
EMEA, yeah.
Yeah, so what specific challenges would you say have arisen for you coming out of Denmark and European culture as a woman in this field in design and communication?
I think we do tend to have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to racial issues in Europe, more than if you come from the States, because it's not as dominant as it is. So that's definitely something that we're aware of. We do work in a company where I work in a company where we try to bring as many different cultural perspectives around the table as possible, because we know that that's what fosters creativity in the long run. So it is something that is of great importance to us. But it's about creating that culture of sharing, and not only making it a superficial thing, not just ticking the box and having the right people around the table, right?
Yeah. Okay. And what about you, Diana?
Yeah, and I would love to just share some stats with people. So this is something I read very recently. It was kind of shocking to me. But, being a female co-founder of a company, we are always kind of sometimes asked if there are investors that want to maybe invest in Constellation Agency. And so these are the numbers, venture capitalist-wise. So 58% of Caucasian men get funding in the US. 20% of Asian men get funding in the US. 11% of Caucasian women get funding from venture capitalists in the US. 6% of Asian females get funding for venture capitalists in the US. Then it goes down to 2% of black men. Then it goes to 1% of black men, 1% of Latino men, and 0% of Latina women get funding in the US as of February 2021, and that was quoted in Forbes. 93% of venture capitalists are owned by Caucasian men. And so the reason I tell you this stat is if you basically own a company yourself, you have to make intentional decisions to have diversity. And you have to make sure leadership understands that it is an intentional decision. The decision is not just, do I find the right person for the job, but how do I find the right diverse person for the job? By doing that and making sure that it comes from the very top and the message is super clear, that's how you have diversity in companies. And so that's what I wanted to share from my personal experiences.
Okay, thank you. I see a question from the audience, and this is actually a really great question. So we've been speaking a lot about how you both have done so much work to kind of combat gender and ethnic discrimination in the workplace and try to explore diversity in those different ways, but men are also a part of the conversation, and as you just shared the statistics, they're a very important part of the conversation here. So they asked, there are very few women and others in the room, but how can men contribute more to the equality balance in the workplace? So, any thoughts on that?
I mean, going back to the stats that you first told us about, with how many women in your management team have actually asked you for something, right? It's only one. I think men who are in leadership position can be better at actually nudging women that where they see there is a talent. Women are not as good as asking for things, so nudge them into actually stepping up and taking a bit more responsibility and being heard more. I think that's, but it is a. Obviously, men are just as much as part of the solution as we are. So, and we talked about it backstage. There have been men on stage with us to discuss this topic? Yeah.
And I totally agree with you. I mean, at the end, some of my biggest mentors were all men, and at the end, I could not have gotten here without men helping me along the way. They are pretty much run industries in the US, and so without their advocacy, without their support, without their networks of people that they continue to introduce us to and advance us, we would not be one of the fastest growing companies in the US.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of, I know there was a story in your early career, I did a little bit of stalking, and you got nicknamed the Iron Butterfly. And it's because of the way you reacted to some disrespect that was coming from men in the industry that expected from you as an Asian woman to be very, submissive and quiet, and they didn't know that you were a powerhouse. So tell us a little bit about how your identity as women, how you've had to kind of navigate that in order to kind of gain that respect from the men in your industry so they would take you more seriously.
I love the Iron Butterfly. You have to tell. You have to start out.
Okay.
I feel like that's a character in Marvel. That's the next one, the Iron Butterfly.
Sure. It was quite funny. I mean, I was raised to be submissive. I came from an all-Asian family. My parents were like always telling me my entire life I have to either be a doctor or a lawyer or marry one. Those were my choices growing up. And so here I am, and 18 years old, running in a car dealership because I needed to support my education and support my lifestyle, and I didn't want the burden to go to my parents at the end. So by doing that for 4 years, I became a finance manager at the local car dealership. I was 23 years old when I got promoted to this position. The men were double my age. And so my first day at work, this man came up to me, threw a file at me, and said, "Girl, bill this out." Now, I was his supervisor, and he was double my age. He was a salesperson, I was a finance manager, I was his supervisor. So it's my first day at work. I took the file, I ran after him. In the middle of the entire showroom, I took the file and I just started ripping it in tiny little pieces. Now, this is everybody watching me in the showroom, employees as well as probably customers. And at that time, I was so focused on just one thing, which was the point that I deserved to be there. And I deserved to be the finance manager. So when I ripped it all up, I basically tossed it in the air, and I said, "You made a mistake. Start over again." And everybody that saw me that day realized, I earned respect just by that action. By ripping the file and saying, "You made a mistake," and walking away, they realized that I wasn't going to be submissive, that I wasn't going to take bullshit overall, and that you had to respect me in order to actually get me to do something for you. And from there, I realized that this intention that I had, that for me to have any experiences that were worthwhile in my career, I had to make it happen for myself. And in ways, I didn't want myself to feel bad for those actions. I didn't, because I deserved to be there. And so from there, it really came from, an inside belief that I deserve to be there. So I believe that that starts with each and every one of us. When you believe that you deserve to be there, you will ask for those opportunities. And we all deserve to have those.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great speaking with you, Diana and Miriam. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you for your questions and everyone for listening.
Thank you.